Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and today we have one of our counselors, Tommy Moore, with us. And Tommy, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing. Tommy, for those that don't know, he's been a pastor forever, worked in the church world for a long time, and right now you're currently getting your master's in counseling and also National Christian Counseling Association pastoral counselor.
Yeah, a father to 4 daughters. So,
Ooh.
Yeah, 7 to 13 as far as their ages. Been married for 18 years. I still work at a church at Asbury and Bossier. And yeah, I'm wrapping up the master's degree in counseling, but been at Clint Davis for about a year and a half now as a pastoral counselor. Now kind of as an intern. It's kind of all bleeding together. Kind of a weird hybrid model. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So take us back a little bit, kind of who is Tommy Moore and how did you get into the church? Where are you from? Backstory kind of stuff.
Yeah, I grew up in Houghton, just down the road, and my home church was Eastwood Baptist Church. So I grew up Southern Baptist. My home was Christian-ish, so my mom was very devout Christian. My dad was disinterested. He would say he was a Christian, but that wasn't really active. When I was around 9 or 10, we had a traumatic loss. My sister passed away kind of suddenly. And so that had a significant impact on me, on my parents. My dad was he owned a business, and he kind of just spent all his time at that business for the next decade.
Was she older or younger?
She was younger. So I was 9. She was around almost 3. We both got a stomach virus, but for her, she was young. It attacked her pancreas, and in 2 days.
Wow.
It was just a freak. I mean, the doctors were like, we wouldn't have even checked for this if you brought her in. I mean, we brought her in pretty quickly, but anyway, so there was a lot to grieve there. A lot of, I think for both parents, kind of processing, feeling guilty, even though there was no reason to. But
Was that your only sibling?
My only sibling. So I was the only child after that. So it was a very quiet household for me. And so now having 4 daughters, it's not quiet. And that is, it's a challenge to kind of navigate that because I get overstimulated very easily. And so we're still working through that.
Yeah.
So that happened. My mom buried her grief in the church. My dad buried his grief or hid his grief, whatever, at work. And if I ever want to see him, he owned a baseball card and comic shop. So that was awesome to grow up in. Played Magic, Warhammer, D&D, read comics.
That was in Houghton?
That was, it started in Houghton, then it was in Bossier, actually right down the road here, down Old Minden Road.
Okay.
Near Ralph Kaku's, and then across the street, whatever the other place is. So
What was it called?
Tom's Triple Play.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it kept growing, and he kept adding new things. So yeah, I got to play Warhammer and Magic for free. I got to read comics for free. So that was pretty good. But if I had any connection with my dad, it was as an employee. And so that was the gist of it. I've now just got back into Magic this past year, and it's kind of fun to look back at the old cards and just get into that hobby again 20 years later. It's been fun. So my dad was absent, to say the least. And as a teenager, I started looking for kind of like a male role model. And so at Eastwood, the pastor there at the time was Scott Touch. He's now a pastor in Blanchard. His kids are great. I mean, Scott's amazing. And he was just just a great mentor.
Yeah.
And there's a Sunday school teacher there named Carl Kaufman. He's now in Monroe as a physical therapist. But both those guys really poured into me and gave me a lot of affirmation and validation. If I look back on it, from a psychotherapy standpoint, hey, these guys filled a father figure role, gave me positive affirmation, encouraged me to read scripture, to kind of take my faith seriously. And so later years of high school, I'm like, oh, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to be a man that pours into other people. And I didn't know at the time the word's discipleship.
Yeah.
So Scott and Carl were incredible disciple makers, very empowering leaders, giving me space and giving others space to lead and teach. And so that was huge. So I went to ministry at 18, and as a Southern Baptist, that's like, you want to be a pastor, and you're a dude. Here's your certificate.
Right.
Get to work. So, given a lot of responsibility early on, which in retrospect, I'm like, was crazy. What me and some of my friends who were knuckleheads were given authority in certain spaces that we weren't ready for. But overall, a good stretch. Also, in my late teens, music became a part of that ministry piece, which I had no idea. But I mean, I've kind of accidentally been a musician for 25 years or something. So that's been a part of my work. I've been a worship leader and a discipler.
Is that guitar, piano? What do you play?
Guitar, yeah. Acoustic and singer, songwriter, and all that stuff. So that's been fun. But my passion's always music's just been the thing I do in order to get the job, to do the thing I love, which is to discipleship and to pour into other people. And so I've done that for 25 years, mostly with church plants until recently. Asbury's been established, but almost every other job I had was at churches that were probably 10 years old or younger. And we started a few with some friends. So a lot of fun memories and eventually some heartache and some wrestling with faith stuff along the way. So as I was getting to a crisis moment with faith and with calling, which I've worked through, and we can talk about that in more detail, but I kind of was like, what do I really, if I don't want to work in church world anymore long term, what do I want to do? What do I really enjoy?
Well, let's pause that. So,
Yeah.
So just, for people looking at maybe church as a culture and us looking at it now in hindsight, there's still a lot of pastors who, guys who go, I want to be a preacher. I want to do discipleship. So I'm going to go get a degree and I'm going to start this thing at 18 or 19.
Yeah.
And lots of them have family trauma. Lots of them have never been discipled.
Sure.
Having mentors, kind of work through those things.
Yeah.
So when did you become aware that in the midst of all of that kind of stuff that was not healthy for you?
The trauma stuff?
Yeah. Like, did you just shelve that,
Yeah. So there was a moment, I was in Richmond, Virginia for like 8 years. So as that season was wrapping up, I was actually getting therapy or counseling, coaching with this guy, Jim, in Houston. And he just asked me some questions about my history.
And you were how old then?
At that point, so I left that church in 2019. So that's 6 years ago. So I was 36 when I left that church. But at the time I was asking these questions, I was about 34. Things were coming to a head with a lot of things. We can get to that later.
Sure.
So with Jim, we started going through my history. And I said, hey, I've worked with a dozen pastors in my 20 years of ministry. He's like, and I'm like, 10 of them have had affairs. Mm-hmm. And he said, Tommy, why do you keep choosing to work with these guys? And I'm like, I don't think you understand. They had the affairs, not me.
Yeah.
But there was some kind of weird subconscious synergy where people that had dysfunctional pasts just like me we connected. I don't know, there's a weird thing happening there, if that makes sense. And there obviously were exceptions. There were some great men of God that I worked with. I mean, the math might not be exactly that, but there was definitely a high proportion of scandal. And also, always side of that scandal was that pastor's trauma. Like, because we would bond, we'd be best friends, we'd share our life stories. And then I would show up as like a second in command, weird buffer. Like I would be in triangulation, I would be the rescuer over and over and over again. Between the pastor, maybe the harm they might cause a congregation. But realizing my own trauma was a part of that too. That I grew up in a household where, I don't know, there needed to be peace and quiet. And so I helped people be at peace. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So my trauma was, in my childhood was connected to the healing I thought I was doing and am doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we've talked about some of this. That's definitely has been mine as well, as being the caretaker, being the oldest, being kind of the glue of holding things together, or at least feeling like that was my responsibility.
Yeah.
It's like your greatest strength and your greatest weakness when you're not,
right,
aware of it or dealing with it in a healthy way.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of saying it. It was my greatest strength and my greatest weakness, because I could see even as a teenager, before ministry at all, I lived in a neighborhood where there was a lot of trauma, like a lot of drug addiction, a lot of crime, just a lot of sexual abuse. So, I mean, at the time, I didn't have language for any of that. I just knew these stories. But I felt like I was always kind of the glue guy that calmed people down or kept people safe. Mm-hmm. And I look back now and say, oh, that's what I did from 18 to 30 as a pastor. I was the person that helped people feel safe or feel heard and loved and find healing. But then realizing, because I learned that even earlier as a child, that is my role to make people feel safe.
Yeah, and some of that, right, is just God's wiring of you, probably a gift that He's given you, a temperament, where it says you have apostles and teachers and shepherds and, administrators and these kind of things within the church that God has wired into us. Mm-hmm. And then how, figuring out how much of that is a kind of response to pain versus being congruent with who you are. You know?
Or finding I would find my identity in being
that's a good point.
The peacekeeper or the peacemaker or whatever.
Right. So if we find our identity in Christ and who He's made us to be and who we are, not naturally, it's a bad word, but, authentically, then the peacemaking comes in a good way versus it being the way in which we're trying to find the peace.
Yeah. or a way to not feel my own feelings or my own emotions or
Pain,
have my own opinion. I don't have an opinion on this. Let's hear your opinion about this.
My needs don't matter.
Yeah.
Only yours matter.
Yeah, there was a really pivotal moment in this church in Richmond. This one day happened where I had the pastor had come back from like a week-long vacation or event or something. And so that morning, one of the staff members came to me about a situation that she had conflict with him. And we talked through it, spent 2 hours wrestling through it. And like, I made her, like, okay, good. She feels better now. I feel exhausted. She feels better. Like I sat down in my chair. The pastor then comes in. He pulls me aside for a walk. And then he talks to me about the exact same situation from his perspective. Doesn't know that I just had a conversation with the other staff member. And I spend 2 hours with him and making him feel better about her. And then I get done with that, and I get home, and I sit in my chair. I'm like, what the hell just happened? Like, what? I don't have it. No one even asked what my feelings on the situation are. I made her feel better about him and him feel better about her. I didn't actually bring them together in the room, so I was peacekeeping, not peacemaking. And I think when I noticed that, then I called Jim. I was like, hey, I got a problem. Yeah. And then he pretty quickly identified it and taught me about triangulation and those kind of pieces. So,
So we talked about this morning earlier on today, but so where did you start working with this therapist and kind of looking at your own stuff? Where did the shift or the struggle in faith come in and the church hurt and some of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so 2016 was a weird year. Okay. So this dynamic was happening within the church that I was working at, the triangulation piece, a lot of dysfunction and poor communication, bitterness cycle, all this stuff was happening internally at my specific church. With me being this peacekeeper, which was not, I thought was healthy. I found value and people love me and whatever, but I realized this is not sustainable.
Sure, they were very happy to use you and let you keep peace.
Absolutely. And a part of that was but the conflict just kept escalating or in frequency, maybe intensity, and I just got exhausted in that role. So that's happening around this time in 2016. Also, a pretty controversial election happens in 2016.
Oh, there was?
Yeah. The mayor for Richmond. No. And just how the church interacted around that election really broke my heart. Because I grew up in Southern Baptist world. I grew up where I was taught character matters, your integrity matters, and stuff like that. And once again, I'm not trying to get too heavily involved in either side of that, but the endorsement of people who had no character really made me think, wait a minute. I was fed a load of crap. I also had 4 daughters, so I grew up in a culture that I think has some problematic views around women. And as a dude, I never experienced that. I don't know. I wasn't. What's the way to word that? I just had dude privilege. I don't know. I know. I was 18 and the guy like, hey, I want to go in ministry. Cool. Here's your ordination certificate. Get to work.
For better or worse.
For better. Well, yeah. And there's better and worse in that too. It's mixed. Sure. But as I had daughters and I worked at a church that did have strong female leadership, Me Too happened around that time, and then Church Too happened. So just story after story of sexual abuse and misogyny and sexism in the church. All that was happening. A lot of the social justice stuff around racism was happening. I was also
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter, yeah. So a lot of those things are kind of coming to a head, the political environment, and then just this personal frustration with the church I was working at. And I'm like, my faith is shifting about what I think about a lot of these things. I just feel really disappointed in the evangelical church, and experienced a lot of heartache in trying to figure out what accountability looked like for that specific job I was at. But then I can look back over the years and say, man, there's so much toxic masculinity be the catchword, but there's so much brokenness. There's so much hurt. Pastors that are hurt because they have trauma in their past, but they're working from a place where they need validation or affirmation from the job in an unhealthy way. And then when they don't get that, they hurt other people. They feel afraid of losing power. There's so many power dynamics, all that. So I kind of looked back over that 15 years, not just at church in Richmond, but overall experience. And I was really kind of like fed up for a while.
Yeah, I bet. And then, paralleled, so you're looking at it from like an actual pastor's perspective who's gone through some of these things and been kind of on the church system staff toxicity level, which, this is not new to people who listen to podcasts. Like the American church has got its issues. And then you also have then the movement of kind of the seeker sensitive, like me and you were coming out of the Willow Creek, Saddleback, these huge mega church movements of let's just make people happy, very low accountability, very high, invitation, very low challenge, and just a congregation of American people going, I'm here to consume. I don't even know why we do these rituals. I don't read my Bible.
Right.
I don't know what I know about women in ministry or homosexuality or abortion or Jesus in general.
Yeah.
I have a general, kind of just culture of evangelism, but also a lacking relationship.
Yeah.
And, those things coming together, I think, are what bring about like therapy.
Yeah.
The idea of like somebody sitting in a room with you and talking about your problems, confessing sin, getting direction. Mm-hmm. It's like, it would be nice if that's the role of the church and pastors.
Yeah.
But it wasn't happening.
Right. Yeah.
Everything becomes this like, you show up to an event, someone lectures you for 50 minutes, in a small group, you move to another, you have 10 minutes to move to another event where someone sings music at you and then lectures you for another 45 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
If it's good, you might have some good contextual scripture. If it's bad, you get a TED talk and some jokes and 5 minutes of scripture. Yeah. And it's like, that's been like kind of the culture this last little bit.
Yeah, more of a consumerism model. Mm-hmm. There's a pressure so with church planning especially, there's always a pressure to move up and to the right. How do we break these certain weekly attendance metrics? How do we get past 200? How do we get past 300, 500? And there's challenges for each of those things, but even that feels like sometimes the wrong question to ask. Right?
100%, yeah. It's like, how are we growing emotionally and spiritually and, especially for those of us who are leaders who have completely screwed up like you and I have, where we're on the other side of it, hopefully, or someone on the other side of it looking back and going, man, I wish somebody would have said this to me at 18 or 22 or 30,
Yeah. I wish I would have called Jim a lot sooner,
Right, yeah. or had a Jim to call you.
Yeah. Because, just having the right person to ask the right questions, to notice patterns you don't notice in yourself. And also for me to have the ability to hear it and receive it.
Sure.
He pissed me off with the questions. He's, the first question he says, I hear what you're saying. How are you contributing to the problem? I said, wait a minute. No. I don't think you understood what I said. Let me tell you the story again. Yeah. They're the problem, not me. So he asked a lot of great questions that pissed me off in a good way.
Yeah, that's good. It's the same thing we do now for, a woman who comes in and who's been in 10 abusive relationships.
Right. Yeah.
You go,
sure. It literally is that, right? Yeah.
Right. It's like you're not at fault for being abused.
Yeah.
You should never be abused.
Right.
But let's look at the internal pattern in which you pick people who are abusive.
Yeah. And
no one wants to hear that up
It's
front.
so hard to hear because you can go to each example you picked and go, no, this is why I chose to work here or work with this person or whatever. Or there's no way I could have known that about that person when I got into a partnership with them. Yeah, I do think there's with the consumer model of a church, the congregation becomes people you can use to further your movement. And you justify that using of them as we're doing kingdom work. But then there's a lack of actual personal discipleship. So you don't have a Jim that actually knows your life and can speak into your life, right? Mm-hmm. And can ask questions because you're so busy growing the mission, that people become commodities you use to push the success of the church.
Yeah, and that mission and success is usually numbers.
That's right. It's almost completely numbers.
Yeah.
And people's
whether
numbers,
monetary numbers are human butts and seats.
Yeah. And if you don't meet the metrics of the numbers, you might lose your job if you're on staff, or you might get. It's gross. I get the pressure. I get the reason why, but there's a gap there in terms of just pastoral care.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the word, right? It's like shepherding.
Yeah, shepherding. Yeah, and it is have compassion for church planters. There's such turnover with people coming in and checking out what you're about that you can get burnt out a lot because you feel like betrayed by people you thought were bought into the vision of the church. And then you put up walls. You're like, hey, I was really hurt by these close friends that I thought, whatever, we're gonna be lifelong friends, and they bailed. I'm not going to put myself out there again as a pastor and be vulnerable. So I have a lot of compassion and empathy for people in those lead roles too, because it's hard.
Yeah, and unless we have compassion and empathy and sit with those pastors and like we do now, then that story never gets told either, and so we can't really help solve that problem because it's two sides. It's not to blame. Yeah. A lot of people go into ministry because they love the idea of Jesus, or they have a relationship with Jesus, and they think, I'm going to be compassionate and work with people and sit with people and do this thing.
Yeah.
They get into the machine.
Yeah.
And the machine doesn't allow for that.
Right.
And it's either quit and go do something else, or talk yourself into, well, I'll get to do a little bit of this if I do this, and at least I'm getting to do this.
Yeah.
And then the bar gets lowered.
Right. Yeah. It's you can justify it with spiritual bypass it, right?
Sure.
You just say, whatever, use whatever religious language you want to justify the shallowness or the unsustainability of the model.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think we also get into, the savior complex of like, but we have to have room for all these people.
Yeah.
We have to be open and, all this stuff. And it's like, nope, you can't save 400 people with one person.
Right. Yeah. I like Eugene Peterson. I mean, his idea was like 150 people max per pastor. So I think there's something beautiful in that. And there are churches that are much bigger, that are successful,
sure,
but they have to be very intentional along the way, like building structures for pastoral care and shepherding.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like a church can grow so fast, so big so fast that they don't have that in place, and then all of a sudden it just becomes about sustaining the system rather than you lose sight of the original work.
Yeah, it's good. So that leads you to counseling, which leads you to kind of like a, kind of pain place with the church. And so then what happens?
Yeah, so I was in a pretty dark place. There also, as I look back now and do a lot of family history work, I can see depression generations back. Mm-hmm. So I was hitting a spot of burnout and depression in ministry, like trying to figure out if I even want to do this anymore. I quit the job in Richmond. Honestly, I took a year off. I think originally I was like 6 months, intentionally, and then this became a year. I'm like, 6 months in, I'm like, I better start looking. It's like, wait a minute, I probably should have been looking a lot sooner than that.
Right.
There's a lot I'll do differently about that season.
Sure.
I'll say a few things. So one, I've now done a lot of work where I can have a lot of appreciation for that boss I worked for. I can really appreciate how our whole staff was dysfunctional and kind of toxic in that season, and I can really appreciate some great qualities about that guy. I grew a lot under his leadership. He gave me a lot of opportunities to grow. So I want to caveat that now years later, I can look back and say, okay, that was a really just bad season, really hard season for the whole church. There's still some things I would have issue with, but it was a group effort to screw all that up.
Yeah.
But when I quit the job, I had a lot of responsibilities in the job. So I'm like, I need to be kind to them and give them 2 months notice. And I also was under the Brene Brown clear as kind idea. So I was like, I need to be clear about why I'm quitting, but also be kind and give them 2 months. And one of those things might have been fine. Actually, I don't know if 2 months is ever a good idea. But I went to the boss and like, hey, I'm quitting. And here's the reasons why. I was pretty direct about my frustrations with him. And by the way, I'll be here for 2 more months.
Yeah.
And those 2 months were just chaos. I mean, it's just not healthy, not a good place to be in, because then we had this elephant in the room, and it was just awkward.
Oh yeah.
So
dude.
I should have given a 2-day notice. If I want to be that clear about why I'm leaving, I should have been a 2-day notice.
It's hard, man. It's a hard balance. I mean, I've been on both ends of it, of the quitter, or the changer, or the letter goer, and to be able to say no, you can't stay here 2 more months. Like, you got to go.
Yeah.
It's hard to do.
Yeah, and I'd been there at that point. The church was 10 years old. I'd been there for like 8 of them, and I was pretty beloved by the community. So it was a heartbreaking thing for them. And for me, for sure, and then kind of just caught people off guard because I had kept it close to the chest for a good amount of time there. So people were kind of like, oh, you're that mad. You're that far done. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot I would do differently over the course of the few years there, but one thing would be quit with 1 week, shorter notice, and probably just be less direct because I didn't really feel like it even mattered.
Well, yeah, if you're going to go, I tell people this all the time, like, it depends on what you want, right? It depends on if you want to reconcile this relationship and there needs to be some repair to the rupture, or if you can reconcile that within yourself and forgive and move on. Yeah. And sometimes it's not great to go in and blast somebody with all the things that are wrong if you're not willing to sit in it. Yeah.
I will say I kept it tight. It's like I had like maybe 10 pages.
I'm not saying you
I had 10 pages. I had like I trimmed it to 2 paragraphs. Like, here's one example. If you want more, I got the I got the second volume of. So I did keep it tight. But I was also just wrestling with a lot of faith stuff there, and a lot of people at that church were being hurt by the system. So I was really wrestling with, is this thing doing any good? Mm. Not just this church, but this model in America, the world, whatever. So I wrestled with the church being a healthy place, the Big C church being a healthy place for people to be at. Mm-hmm. And I probably spent, a good, I would say until the last year or two. So for 5 years, I wrestled with the cliche words would be deconstruction and then kind of reconstruction. But
why are people so scared of the deconstruction word?
Well, because people are scared of it because although it implies a reconstruction, it doesn't often have one. Most people, So Rob Bell, I don't know if you're a fan of his or not. Whatever, or a fan of his earlier work or later work.
Definitely a fan of his earlier work. It's one of the reasons I went into seminary was I read Velvet Elvis.
Yeah.
And it was a great book to shake me out of the legalistic, kind of Southern Baptist view that I had experienced. And I looked on the back of on the sleeve cover, and he went to Fuller.
Yeah, there you go.
And I looked up like what their counseling, degree was or whatever, and it was like integration between psychology and theology. And I was like, oh man! So I looked it up, and that's actually literally what led me to Fuller, which is a crazy.
I love that. I love Rob. I love his early stuff. I think he's a great communicator. He's very creative. I mean, he changed the game in a lot of ways. But forever, I'm like, okay, Rob is going to be a guy that non-Christians can listen to or read, and he's going to be the bridge. A guy like Rob is going to be the bridge between this, secular worldview or whatever and Christ. And then what I experienced over and over and over again, and that's nothing to do with Rob, it's just is the opposite. Rob became the bridge off for Christians to go into non.
Yeah.
And so I think people are afraid of deconstruction being that, where deconstruction is just the road to off. Completely. And I don't know the data on it, but I have plenty of friends that are no longer interested in church work after deconstructing. Now, they've deconstructed because of church hurt, because of just modern philosophical issues, LGBT, whatever. There's lots of reasons. But once they kind of moved off, once they let go of one thing in the faith, they said, why do I need any of it?
Yeah.
Which, the slippery slope fallacy or idea. But it's like, well, I'm seeing it in real time with a lot of friends that just said, I'm just going to give it all up.
Yeah, it's interesting to me when people treat a word like that as dangerous. Yeah. I mean, I think it can be. I don't think the word itself or even the act of wrestling with belief structures and paradigms is the actual danger. I think doing that outside of a good community is.
Sure.
Also
the entire Bible is deconstruction. Right? I mean, you have the Ten Commandments, they're written in stone, whatever. Literally, the next book, like it was Deuteronomy, I think maybe it's one of the next few ones. Deuteronomy is the second Torah. How do we take the Ten Commandments that we got while we were traveling in the wilderness? How might we apply these truths to a new situation where we now have the Promised Land, right?
Yeah.
The prophets, like the history, like all these things are reinterpretations of the original word from God. Mm-hmm. So the entire Bible is deconstruction after and reconstruction. And then the intertestamental period, I mean, the reason you have rabbis and synagogues and everyone's interpreting, okay, now that we're not in Israel and we're a part of the exile and we're under Roman oppression or Babylonian, whatever, how now do we live in this new reality? Because what we used to be a people that were traveling from Egypt to the Promised Land. So that looked a certain way when we're traveling in tribes and tents. Then we had our country. That looked a certain way. Then we got conquered and spread out. Now we're in these different pockets. That looks a certain way. So Jesus comes in and is like, I'm here to fulfill the law. I'm here to give you another understanding of the Old Testament, right? And then we have the New Testament. And Paul's like, okay, now that you're not in Jerusalem or Nazareth or Capernaum or whatever, now that you're in Corinth and you're in Ephesus and you're in Philippi, what does it look like to be a follower of Jesus in a new city in a new era, right? So the entire Bible is literally reinterpretation of God and God's relationship with us and how we should relate to each other within a new community and historical context, whether we're conquered people, travelers, whatever. So all of the Bible is an evolution of the understanding of God. And then Jesus being the ultimate expression, right? Hebrews says, hey, in the past God spoke in many ways, different ways, but now Christ is the ultimate expression. And even I'd put an asterisk on that. Christ is the ultimate expression, but we now reinterpret him, or we now try to understand him in our new lenses. So we're now in the 21st century. How might the person of Jesus shape our lives with iPhones, right, and the internet and whatever? There's so many things that exist now that didn't exist then, and so we have to look at the truth of Scripture, the truth of Jesus, and say, what does it look like to be faithful to Jesus in the 21st century? So, yeah, I think it can be frustrating to say, oh, these things are sacred, but hey, that thing that you think is sacred, that's your sacred cow, that belief has only existed for like 200 years. Right? I grew up in the rapture idea. I don't know were you like a Left Behind guy?
Oh yeah. I mean, I read the first one, and like that was kind of the evangelical Southern Baptist. Like, this is what happens. Like, one day you're going to be standing here, and then somebody's clothes are going to drop next to you, and the plane's going to crash, and it's terrifying.
And like, you better not get caught doing something you shouldn't be doing when the rapture comes. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so there was
don't be looking at porn when the rapture
right.
comes.
Yeah. You're like, oh.
And don't cuss on your way when you fall off the cliff.
That's right.
If you don't.
Yeah. So There's a movie called The Thief in the Night. It's like from 1975.
Okay.
It's before Left Behind existed. This was like this movie. It's like a horror. It's terrifying. And I saw it as a kid, which is not age appropriate. And it's like a Stephen King, like watching It, but it's the rapture. And so you're like, okay, if I'm watching a demon clown, I can separate that from reality. But the church telling me this is what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So this demon locust animal that's torturing people, that's real. That's what's going. So that's traumatic. That's a whole other podcast episode.
Yeah.
But I grew up believing the rapture was like concrete. This is how it happens. And then like I went to seminary, out of Southern Baptist Seminary, and researched it. And I'm like, this belief's only been around for like 150 years.
Yeah.
It's not historical Christianity.
Right.
We kind of made it up. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. So there's so many beliefs that we have that are only.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that. I mean, at Covenant where I attend now, we're trying to get as close to like kind of what were the disciples doing, what's been historically done for 3,000 years, what's the Bible teach, and let's kind of stick to that kind of thing. And it's interesting to go through things and go, oh yeah, this is 100 years old, or this is, and even with psychology, I know we're going to get into that in a second, but like shifting to psychology a little bit, it's the same thing. Like there's a lot of clinicians who are like, EMDR is the way and the truth and the life.
Right.
And it's like, it's a great tool.
Yeah.
But we don't even know what that does. And I was reading something yesterday or last week that was saying that a lot of research is coming out saying the bilateral stimulation is not really even necessary with EMDR. And there's like a big argument about whether, what's happening and why you actually need the bilateral. And so my point is just like, and the body keeps the score. People are coming and going, wait, some of this stuff isn't accurate and this was not researched well and these references aren't up to date anymore. And it's like, all I know is we're not going to be talking about EMDR in 20 years, most likely, but we will be talking about
tell
Christ.
Me I just dropped like $1,000 getting trained in that.
Right?
Yeah. No, you're right. The modalities change, and I think the questions that EMDR asked even before the bilateral stimulation, like I think, this is really helpful structure.
Yep.
To do talk therapy with.
Well, yeah, because we were talking about another theory this morning, and you're like, oh, that's the same. And once you realize that, like once you get enough experience with people and models, you eat the meat and spit out the bones. Is that what you say? Yeah, you chew up the meat, spit out the bones. It's like, this is saying the same exact thing.
Yeah.
And then these outlier things are just people's opinions and kind of nonsense on top of the. Yeah. It's just another flair to what the meat actually is.
Yeah. And you could tie it back if you wanted to. If you're a good, like a good Calvinist would, you can tie it back. Oh, this isn't just John Calvin. This is what John the Baptist said.
Yeah.
Like a good Christian therapist, you can say, okay, EMDR says, we want to replace negative cognitions with positive cognitions. Or like Paul said in Romans 12, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, right?
Yes.
So there is I think there's a lot of biblical grounding in the therapeutic approach.
100%. Yeah. That's good. Mm-hmm. All right. So then you move back here. Is that what happened?
Yeah. So
eBay store.
Yeah. So the Richmond church ended. I stayed there for 6 more months. Our lease ran out. We already sold a house there.
You had all 4 girls at this point?
All 4 girls. Yes. Our don't put me on the spot about our youngest is 7. So at this point she's probably 1 or 2. And for that first stretch, we were intentionally, like I was the sole provider and Ashley was a stay-at-home mom, and that was a great season. But that put some more stress on me. So
no.
So I did the smart thing and I quit a job without a job, which now I would never, everyone says don't ever do that. And I now agree with that.
Yeah.
We ended up being fine financially. If you want to look at it from a God lens, God took care of us. We were a year before the next church job. I did 6 months where I was kind of doing like a discipleship thing and content creation. And I just chose to cut that off so I could focus solely on landing the next church about in the summertime of 2019. And then I learned to eBay. My dad owned a baseball card comic shop, and when he passed away, I inherited sports cards, Magic cards, comics. So I sold all that on eBay, learned the process of eBay, and then learned how to buy stuff from thrift shops and garage sales and whatever. And then online, I buy stuff online, resell it online. So that lasted. I stopped doing that a year ago. So that I did that for about 3 or 4 years, just kind of learning that. I also have ADHD, and I get like hyper focused on a hobby, and so for that stretch, eBay was that hobby. Mm-hmm. But then we landed at a church in Montana, and really, we were there for a year and a half, and we had an opportunity pop up here in Shreveport to come back, and all of our grandparents are here, so we came back to Shreveport almost 4 years ago. And during that time, I was trying to navigate what do I want to do long term?
Mm-hmm.
And I started getting clarity that the thing I really loved most about ministry wasn't music, and don't tell my current job that, but isn't music. It's pouring into people, and it's living in their, like being a part of their lives and helping them. And then also in Richmond, I started going to therapy and being part of basically a similar company to Clint Davis Counseling called Barnabas in Richmond. And they did a lot of lay leader training. So I did all that training. Then I went and helped them lead the training. I was like, hey, I think actually this is what I want to do with my life. I want to transition to focusing solely on counseling. But I was trying to figure out how to provide for my family while getting trained towards that. So took the church.
That's tough.
Yeah. Took the church in Montana. It was a great year and a half.
And what part of Montana was that?
In Helena. So it's the capital. It's in between Bozeman and Missoula, which are two of the bigger cities.
Yeah, I've been to Missoula before.
Yeah, and then up and you go up further for Kalispell. I mean, Montana's it's incredible.
No,
Beautiful.
It's ridiculous.
I really have a lot of respect for the lead pastor there. COVID was we moved there, and then 2 months later, COVID hit, and so we had built a little bit of community there.
COVID, what is that?
Yeah, it was this thing where all the churches, but there's a constant stress of what do we do,
Right?
Because the other CDC is telling us what we can and can't do. And
The bad CDC.
Yeah, and I had come out of that, I was a year removed, but I had come from the pretty hurtful ending at the previous job. The lead guy there had a hurtful ending with the previous person whose position I was filling. And we were kind of coming into 2020 exhausted. And then COVID hit, and that complicated the exhaustion. But anyway, I knew long term I wanted to do counseling, so this opportunity popped up at Asbury to do music and digital discipleship and web, whatever, different stuff. I do a lot of different things. I teach a dozen times a year, whatever. So that popped up as a pretty flexible job, which would allow me to pursue graduate program. I got back here, got connected with Uriah and some other people that are on staff here at Clint Davis, and found out about the pastoral counseling track. So I went through that certification process, and then once I kind of locked that up, then started the graduate program. So it's kind of a hybrid model of pastoral care and just the 20 plus years of being a pastor. So the pastoral care experience from that, and then now getting more educated in the clinical side of things. How
do you feel, what healing do you feel like you've kind of had the last couple of years of getting to do this and kind of working through this? Where do you feel like you're at with that?
Say it again. Say it in a different way.
Well, like, you had the deconstruction, and then you kind of came back, and you're feeling more solid and more steady.
Yeah.
What has changed, or what shifted, or what is shifting?
I think for...
And I'm saying this because there's a lot of people, right, that have church hurt, who have left the faith, or who are out there trying to look at meditation or mindfulness or spirituality or all these things that you and I would say, well, those are Christian things, but because the church has not modeled them well, or community has not modeled them well, we go looking for these things in other places.
Yeah.
How is like sitting with people and, maybe being a part of our team, impacted
been
that?
Healing? Well,
if it has, if it hasn't, it's fine.
So one thing that's one thing that I can answer this in a lot of different ways, but one thing that's changed my mind about faith is sitting in a room with a client and them sharing how their faith has helped them find resilience through trauma, loss, heartache, relationship challenges. So story after story where faith has been such a crucial element of them being able to survive really hard things. There are components where the opposite is true, where the faith is the thing that is the hard thing. So that if they are a part of a toxic church culture or toxic leadership, or a belief system that I think might be harmful for them to have. If it's very shame and fear based, I don't think that's healthy. But resilience, forgiveness, a belief in there's purpose in suffering. So I've just seen client after client. I've seen the value of, hey, these people believe something now that I grew up with, but I would no longer say I agree with these certain intellectual doctrines, right? And we can go down the line some other time on those things. But even though I don't agree with them intellectually, I can objectively see this is really helpful for them. This is really helping them be grounded and seek out help. I mean, there's a lot there. Does that make sense? So
Yeah, it's good.
I think,
Well, that's the important thing. We could get into, and you and I have disagreements on certain theological perspectives or whatever.
yeah,
So do I with every other of the biblical counselors. You know,
Yeah.
we're not all going to have this perfect. I mean, that's why we have denominations, right?
Yeah,
Like it's why
yeah.
we have this spectrum of people. But if we agree on the core things and on the gospel,
yeah,
right, then we can figure out some of that in relationship over time. And if we have the humility to go, hey, this is where I'm at, and here's kind of where God's got me, I can understand why God has you where you're at.
Yeah.
How can we work together for the body of Christ?
yeah,
Then we reach more people and we love on more people without this kind of us versus them thing that's happening.
yeah,
You know, so for me, that you don't even have to list like one of the things.
Right.
The principle is the thing that really matters.
yeah. And I think in my 20s, I mean, I would get coffee with Calvinists. I was not Calvinist then. I'm not, still not. But we would just like go at it. You know, and if someone was like listening to us, like, are you guys friends? You know,
Yeah,
so we would
yeah.
just be like being sarcastic and being dogmatic, and now I'm like, man, I don't really care about any of that stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, I can chew the fat on any of these theological things, but I'm at a place where I'm just kind of at peace with it. Like, hey, we have differences, and is this belief serving you?
Mhm.
You know, is it harmful? There's so much overlap of what we do agree on. Like I said, Christ being the core of that, but just general principles of the Bible, what it means to be a good person, and
Mhm.
what it means to be forgiving, to be gracious, to be humble. That now these nuances I don't even really get bothered by them anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you work with people, we're a mystery, man. There's so much that we can't know. And like we were talking about this morning, so many different layers of why things happen and who's responsible for what. And I mean, the good thing about the biblical lens is, like we said, that there are truths within Scripture and principles of Christ and ways in which human beings just are and aren't that we can always rely on, opposed to the changing science
Yeah.
or the changing philosophy or the changing culture. And so for me, that's where I love the idea of the integration model of like, okay, this is what the science says. Does this match kind of philosophy of care and the way Christ was and the way he embodied who he
Yeah.
said he was?
Yeah.
That's way more important than being like, how much wine can you drink? You know,
Right,
like,
yeah,
or whatever.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And I think there's almost a false dichotomy sometimes, like a cultural war. Like if we actually looked at, and did a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap on both sides of clinical and biblical counseling, or biblical worldview. So there's way more in common. They have way more in common with each other than they have differences. And the differences can be important and significant. And we can, depending on what it is, you can address that. But there's a lot of overlap, and I'd say 99% of our work exists in that overlap.
Mhm.
Like there's
You mean between a biblical counselor and a therapist?
meaning what the Bible would say about what makes a good counselor, or
Oh,
how
yeah.
do you find healing, how do you think correctly, whatever, in the clinical world. I'd say there's just a lot of overlap.
No, there's a lot of overlap
Yeah.
for sure.
And I'd say most of our work with clients exists in the overlap
Uh-huh.
and not in the differences.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the four places that I would push against are what we talked about earlier, which is kind of our views of suffering.
Yeah.
Where do we find hope in suffering?
Yeah.
How do we have internal worth and security? And then probably lastly, like what do we believe about how people change?
Sure. Yeah, those are significant.
You know, so those are the things where I think even if you have different theology,
Yeah.
right? Like even if you're like, I'm pro LGBTQ or I'm fine with abortion or, I'm fine with women in ministry, these kind of hot button, or I'm a Calvinist or I'm Arminianist, like all of those things we could, like you said, argue about it. People have been writing books about it for 3,000 years. There's mystery in some of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You can have firm beliefs in it and you can be very confident that you don't
Right.
think there's mystery,
Right.
but there's some.
Mm-hmm.
But those other things like suffering, and sitting with a person who lost a kid, or sitting with a person who has clinical anxiety, or whose mom has cancer, what we believe about that suffering and why it happens, and how we help them to walk through that, from a secular worldview and in a biblical or Christian worldview, they're just, in my opinion, not the same.
Sure. Yeah.
And so
Yeah. The word that stuck out to me was like hope.
mhm.
So when you look for healing and belief that this can get better or whatever it might be, having a position of hope. And I think, I can't remember which one, if it was my guy in Richmond or in Montana, but just as we were talking about the differences between like just atheism and Christianity, it's like, hey, at the end of the day, Christianity is just a better story.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Well, it's one of hope.
Yeah. And it's a story at all, I guess. I don't know. But it's, you know, yeah, it's one of hope, and it's one that stories are powerful, right? They unite us, and they give us significance. They give us purpose, but they give us ways to understand suffering. So with Christ is the suffering servant, right? He's been tested in all ways that we have. Like, he understands, the man of sorrows. So for a person that's struggling with depression or anxiety or any of these things, they can look at Christ and say, you know, Jesus suffered in similar ways, and he found hope. Or you can look at David. I love David. He's a psalm where, like, the first half of the psalm, he's just tearing God apart.
Oh yeah, lamenting.
Yeah, just, God, you've abandoned me. My enemies are thriving. I'm suffering. You're a liar. You're not true. You know, he just kind of goes off. And then at the end of it, he's like, wait a minute. Okay, that's just how I feel in this moment. Like, I'm just kind of, I just need to get that off my chest. Now that I'm settled down, I'm regulated, I'm calm. Okay, that's my bad.
Yeah.
God, you are actually pretty good. And I was just having a temper tantrum. But I love it because it's like all in one psalm. It's like this emotional temper tantrum. And then he kind of gets recentered around the truth of God's presence. And then, you know, the person doesn't have that recentering piece and just has the lament without the hope. It's like, yeah. So, yeah, I think people that have religious backgrounds have a lot to pull from to help them live a better life.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, I think that goes back to the deconstruction part. It's like, it's great to kind of pull apart some lies that you've learned over the years and some bad theology and some, you know, toxic things. But if you don't then circle back to, oh, I'm not the victim of all things. You know, I also, like, you've done a really good job with that. I've heard you talk about it several times. But, you know, just even telling your story today, like, looking back on those seasons and going, oh, I participated in the toxicity, whether I knew it or not.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's where we actually bring people in healing is, man, if it's all just somebody else's fault that we're the way we are. Yeah. You know, if it's all my trauma, if it's all my experience with my parents, if it's all the culture I live in or my ethnicity or my gender or identity, if my identity's in those things, whether I believe it or somebody else has told me they are, it's a lot of hopelessness. Yeah. You know, but when we can go, okay, yes, that thing hurt me. God did not intend for me to receive that thing. And that thing did shape and stunt me in some ways. But now I'm 32 or 45 or 25. And now being aware of that, how do I move from that victim seat of this thing happened, it wasn't fair, to acknowledging, oh, and I've hurt people along the way because of this pain, which was probably why they hurt me, and the cycle continues.
Sure. Yeah, and that's even the work with, you know, understanding my parents and their stories. Sure. The childhoods they had growing up, and realizing we're all complicated. And, you know, even for my dad, I could say, hey, these are, you know, he was absentee father, emotionally absent, neglectful. There were parts about him even when we had time together that were good. But what was interesting, the year that he died, so he died 2 weeks after I moved to Richmond, Virginia. So he died in January of 2012. And so I had to fly back, and he lived in like this shared community, like assisted living area. And everyone there was like devastated. And they said, your dad was such a caregiver, like, because he was 50 and they were all like in their 80s, but he had health issues because of alcoholism. So he was able to live here, but he ended up being like a pastor to this community. Not he wouldn't lead them to Jesus, but he was taking care of them, checking in on them, emotionally supporting. He's a therapist, whatever you want to call it. And I'm like, huh. I mean, I never saw that side. Sure. My dad never gave me that. But I can say I did see him act like that in other situations with friends or family. He was very pastoral, and I'm like, oh, okay. There are some things I got from him that were negative, but there could be encoded in the DNA that pastoral, you know, the kindness too, and my mom as well. I'm not, you know, I think for her, as she tried to navigate the loss of a child, it's just impossible. Yeah, and she wasn't supported by the people around her. And it's also 1991. I don't know. Like, therapy wasn't.
No, you're not going to a trauma therapist.
Yeah.
Man. Well, that's a great insight. I mean, that's the work that we try to do with people, right? Is like to parse all that stuff out and peel the layer back on the onion and go, okay, how do we see ourselves and our parents? And, you know, it's also now having kids, man. Like, there's so many things I do that I think, oh man, I was so offended that my dad did that, or that he lost his temper, or they got frustrated about this thing. Yeah. But I have to remember, like, I try to repair the rupture. Yeah. You know, like, if I lose my temper or say something, or I'm lazy or, whatever, I go and say, hey, I'm really sorry. That's on me. That's not on you. This is how this should have went down.
Yeah, then you want to say, and you need to know how lucky you are to have a dad that wants to come and repair this.
Yeah,
you don't. You're angry that. Yeah.
No, for sure. I mean, you want to say that. I mean, I've said that. My oldest now is 10 and a half, and so we were somewhere recently, and I don't spank my kids. It's not something that we do. Whether other people do or not, that's a whole nother podcast. But I've never hit them, so that's not something that I do, and for a bunch of reasons. So they don't know anything about that, right? They've never seen anybody hit each other,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
they've never had anybody scream and yell at them. And we were at one of the jiu-jitsu gym that we were at, and something happened with a parent and a kid, and it was just a smack and a loud screaming cuss word in front of everybody.
Oh, wow.
And my son was standing right next to it. And I look over and my wife's covering his ears and moving him away from the situation because I guess the parent had just slapped the kid in the face and cussed him out. And my wife also, who stays at home and isn't a therapist, and she doesn't see that stuff very often either.
I don't see very often.
Right. But most people don't.
I hear stories,
But you know what I mean? It's not as often. But we left and they were fine, and we were sitting down talking, and I said, hey, hey Grady, you okay? How'd you feel about that? How'd it affect you? And he was just like, people really do hit their kids, people really do. He you can tell them, hey, some people hit their kids and yell and cuss. You better be thankful that you have that, that's not going to be helpful because they have no context.
Right.
But, speaking of suffering and trauma, my wife was upset that he saw it,
right.
Was exposed to it. And I was like, it's a great opportunity to have a conversation about the world. One, we're going to love those people.
Yeah.
And I asked him, why do you think that mom did that or that dad did that? And he goes, well, she probably didn't have good parents, is what he said. But it's on some level, somebody taught her how to do what she knows how to do, and she was stressed out and overwhelmed and embarrassed, and so that's discipleship, right? That's teaching our kids instead of blaming and shaming other people. It's helping them understand these things and understand themselves and understand us. That's actually the real rich stuff. It's not that we look back on our parents and they're just good or bad. Right. They're a gray mix of all that too.
Yeah. And also everything I think about them is based on my limited and biased perspective. And shoddy trauma erased memory.
100%. That takes me back to my point is that there's times in which I'm being extremely loving and compassionate to my son.
Yeah.
And yet he takes it as me being mean and hating him and not letting him eat 4 bags of candy or, whatever.
Right.
And so I think about memories that I'll have that I think were really awful moments.
Yeah.
And now I'm not sure how awful that was or if I was just interpreting it as that because I was being selfish and wanted to do what I wanted to do.
We're little kids with very limited perspective on the big picture.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, man, this has been great.
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Any closing thoughts or comments or?
No, not that I can think of it. Think about our kids. We always dream that they're going to be the best combination of, me and my wife. They're going to get the best things of each of us.
Mm-hmm.
And then as they get older, you go, there's some truth to that, but they also get the cocktail of parts about yourself you didn't even know.
Dude.
Yeah, they raise awareness, and so that's a gift, and it's a mirror back to you. I need to work on this. And,
100%.
Yeah.
Well, that's one thing about you, man. I love that you're always so encouraging. You really do have such a good shepherding pastoral heart. I've told you this privately, but you always text me, you always follow up, always have my back with things. And I've learned a lot just from your story and working with you. And you always have good input in staff and cases, and you ask good questions, and so I'm super, super thankful to have you. And it's been super enriching for me and the team. And I know as we grow, the Lord's going to continue to do awesome stuff with you. So, I've heard some of this story, but it's fun to hear it all in one sitting, and honored to kind of see the way in which, man, God has really shaped you and in spite of trauma and hardship, has brought us together to do this work. Yeah. And I'm just very thankful for it.
Yeah, I'm grateful to be here. It's been a year and a half. I feel like you learn way more by being in the room and doing the work, right?
Absolutely.
I appreciate the culture you've created where we can collaborate, and when we're in over our head, we can ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been great.
Which is all of us, all the
Right.
time.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. Well, God bless you guys. Thanks for listening. We hope you have a good week. And you know where to reach us. If this story resonates with you and you have any kind of church hurt, things that you've just been wrestling with the American church or with the culture that you're in, what I would challenge is leave. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
To some degree, go and deal with those conflicts, have those conversations like Tommy was saying, go to your pastor, be kind, be loving, come to a counselor and say, hey, here's the stuff I'm dealing with at church. Let me get some kind of mindfulness about this. Is this me? Is this them? Is this the community? And then go and be a peacemaker. Go and have this conversation with them. Don't avoid it. And then that lets you know whether you should stay in that culture or not.
Mm-hmm.
Now if you assess that and it's abuse and it's awful, yes, leave. Go find another church. Go find another community. Don't stay in a toxic church environment that's continuing to harm you. I hesitate to give that challenge because we have such a consumer mind state, and somebody comes and goes, well, I don't like the song, or not enough people talk to me on Sunday, so I'm out. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying in the interpersonal relationships, if that's something that you're really struggling with, or you just feel like you're at a church where nobody sees you and nobody knows you, meet with somebody. Come talk with one of us. Talk with a pastor or counselor in your area, and see how much that's your hurt and your pain playing into it, or how much maybe the environment's just something you need something different.
Yeah. Yeah, I have an hour of content in response to all that. You just
That's
said,
good.
But not today.
Yeah. Well, let's follow up on that. It'll be good.
Yeah.
All right. God bless you guys. Have a good week.